Hi, welcome. My name is Mark Frutkin. I'm talking to you from my home in Ottawa. I'm a Canadian author with 17 published books of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, including 9 novels, many of them set in Italy. This evening I'm going to read to you from The Rising Tide, a novel published by Porcupine's Quill, a publisher who produces some of Canada's most beautiful books. This reading tonight is presented by Montreal's Jewish Public Library as part of its Open Books, a virtual literary salon, which features authors giving you an inside look into their work. To learn more about this and other free online programs now offered by the JPL, please visit www.jewishpubliclibrary.org or subscribe to the JPL Happenings newsletter by emailing roxana.brauns, that's R-O-X-A-N-A, .brauns, B-R-A-U-N-S, at jplmontreal.org. The Rising Tide is a work of fiction set in 1769 in the beautiful city of Venice, Italy. In a previous novel of mine, Fabrizio's Return, there were 2 characters who had to flee the northern Italian city of Cremona to avoid punishment by the local duke. Those 2 characters stuck in my head and demanded to come back to life again in another novel. I should point out that The Rising Tide is not a sequel, but a novel that stands on its own. The 2 characters are Michele Arcenti, an ex-priest, and his friend Rodolfo, a strange man who carries a skeleton of his own brother strapped to his back. This was punishment from the authorities for having killed his brother, who murdered their father in a land dispute. Michele and Rodolfo make their way from Cremona to Venice. Rodolfo chooses to live on a nearby island, Torcello, as a hermit, while Michele goes into Venice, makes friends with a madame of a bordello, Bianca Luca, who lets him live in her house of courtesans and helps him buy a printing press. Michele starts printing books, including a collection of erotic poetry that gets him in trouble with the local clergy. He also falls in love with one of the courtesans, Francesca. I'll do 2 short readings tonight. My first reading begins near the start of the book in one of the first sections, titled Strange Arrivals and Sightings. Venice, September 1769. A gray door runneled with cracks creaked open onto one of the narrowest alleys of Venice. The calle, a slit of a passage where sunlight entered for a mere 20 minutes a day, was barely wide enough to accommodate a folded open folio. For nearly 2 years, Michele Arcenti had been swinging through the door that faced this narrow capillary of an alley. Today, he exited his print shop to join his friend Arcangelo for lunch on the nearby square. A wind, from the north, he sensed by its freshness, spilled down the alley's throat. He closed the door and turned, setting his tricorn on his head. Then paused in the alley, glanced both ways to see if any customers approached. Not many customers had come to his door in the 2 years since his arrival in Venice, and he couldn't afford to miss any. Those 2 years had passed as quickly as a comet coursing through the heavens. A handsome man, yet no longer in his prime, Michele was slipping into his middle years. His hair, still blue-black, was combed straight back from his forehead. His face displayed the proud look of a patrician from ancient Rome, but some hidden quality lurked behind the eyes. One could sense that here was a man who had once possessed consummate authority, one who had commanded respect, but clearly some unexpected turbulence had entered his life, shaking him to the core. One could sometimes glimpse it in his glance, a flicker of doubt. And yet those same eyes revealed reserves of strength, difficult to perceive, but available when required. As he left his alley and crossed the wide campo on his way to lunch with Arcangelo, he spotted one of the courtesans from Biancaluca's house. Francesca Verace, the youngest and prettiest girl in Bianca's flock, often carried a book in her hand, unusual considering that most courtesans in the city were illiterate. As he walked towards her, he sang out, "Francesca, you look stunning in that golden dress. What are you reading?" She raised the book. "Poems by Aretino. And how are you, Signore Arcangelo?" She smiled shyly and bowed her head. This shyness resulted from her one imperfection, if it could even be called that, a slight but distinct kink in her nose, as if it had once been broken and never reset. She often kept her head low to hide this flaw. "Francesca," he said, placing his hand on his chest, "you mistake me for my friend." He indicated the table across the square. "I am Signore Arcenti. But no matter. Where are you headed?" "We have shared the same house for nearly 2 years. How can she still not know my name?" Before answering, she turned and glanced back the way she had come. Facing him again, she put her finger over her lips and grinned mischievously. She whispered, "It's a secret." Reaching out, she touched her finger to his lips. For a moment, he smelled her orchid perfume, and then she was gone, slipping down an alley, her gold shoes swishing, her brocade slippers making barely a whisper on the cobbles. So now I'll read a second selection from further on in the book. Rodolfo and his skeleton have been sighted on the island, and he is eventually arrested for being a heretic. This happens because the populace of Venice have heard about the skeleton on his back, and the rumor spreads wildly that here is the second coming of Christ. A new inquisitor has arrived in Venice, and he wants to display his power immediately. So Rodolfo is put in prison, and Michele is chosen as his defending advocate. In the section I'm about to read, Michele goes to visit him there. I should add that the second half of the book is very much about the trial of Rodolfo and the power struggle between the new inquisitor from Rome and the Doge, the ruler of Venice. This highlights the historical ongoing struggle between Venice and the Vatican. It also follows the love affair between Michele and Francesca. So Michele heads to the prison and meets the jailer, Teobaldo, there, a somewhat humorous minor character in the book. I'm reading now from the section titled Negotiating the Prison Maze. The maritime weather of Venice resembled a capricious and volatile lover, sunlight shifting into mist or fog or showers in minutes. As Michele headed for the ducal palace, dollops of rain as fat as pigeon droppings began to fall from a suddenly gray sky. He didn't care that he was getting wet, as he was partly protected by his tricorn. He wasn't sure if he would be let in to see Rodolfo, for indeed his friend had been arrested and brought in chains to the Doge's prison. Normally, a prisoner of the Inquisition would have been incarcerated in the smaller heretics' prison, but this was a prisoner like no other, one who might, in fact, be committing the ultimate heresy, claiming to be Christ himself. The Doge had insisted, in a minor show of power, that Rodolfo be kept in the cells next to his palace. Michele wasn't sure if the almond cake he carried in one hand and the jug of wine in the other would prove to be a gift for his friend or bribe for the guard. As he neared the Doge's enormous palazzo and its attached prison, he noticed that the lone guard sat on a low stool under a portico out of the rain. Michele approached warily. "I would like to pay a visit to an occupant of one of your cells. I have a cake and a jug of wine for him. His name is Rodolfo." The guard's tiny black eyes regarded Michele with an evident dullness. Michele had a sudden, disturbing insight. Every little man with a modicum of power must first exercise his authority. He must ensure that his impending benevolence will be seen as a great gift, a gift that must be repaid. "No entry," said the guard, licking his lips, his scraggly, half-rotten sponge of a beard pointing up at the one who had interrupted his profound cogitations. The guard disapproved of being interrupted mid-thought. And, if truth be told, the guard's thoughts, while not of the deepest philosophical bent, were also not of the base sort. He wasn't pondering food, drink, or the soft skin of his woman's thighs, as do most guards the world over in their quiet moments, but rather the next line of dialogue in a play he was writing, about the end of the world as seen through the eyes of a mullet on a fish peddler's table in the Rialto market. Every man and woman in Venice longed to be an artist of one sort or another, even soldiers and whores. "I have cake and wine," Michele grinned hopefully, thinking he might bribe the guard with a taste and a sip. "You just said that." The guard put his hands on his thighs and leaned forward. "All right, let's see it." Setting down the jug of wine on the cobbles, Michele folded back the cloth covering the cake. The guard stared at it with all the consideration and connoisseurship of a baker in the Doge's pastry kitchens. He sniffed. "What sort is it? Smells like almond." "Indeed, it is. Let me compliment you on your nose." Michele kicked himself the moment the ambiguous phrase had left his mouth. Not that the guard had a particularly bulbous, longish, wine-reddened, or beak-like nose. In fact, his nose was quite ordinary, but one never knows the other's sensitivity in such cases. Luckily, the guard ignored the dangerous compliment. Withdrawing his sword from its scabbard, he poked it into the cake several times. He sliced off a corner and shoved the entire piece into his mouth. That's good," he mumbled, and motioned with his little sword at the jug of wine. Michele uncorked it with a pleasing plop and handed it over. The guard, giving the jug a perfunctory sniff, tipped back a healthy glug of wine. "Who'd you say you wanted to see?" "The one known as Rodolfo. You know, the fellow with the skeleton strapped on his back. Can't miss him." "Like something out of a fable by La Fontaine, that one. Pleasant enough, though. All right, then." The guard stood. Michele grabbed his cake and jug, and the two men entered the stone passageway that led into the prison at the heart of the ducal palace. The guard, from whose belt hung dozens of keys, walked with a distinct rattle and clink. As they passed deeper into the damp stone warren, Michele wondered how he remembered which key opened which lock. They walked a long time, turned this way and that, went up a short flight of moss-covered steps, and down a long, narrow passage, now right, now left, through an unlocked iron gate, down and up, right, then left, then right again, around a long curve to a narrow stairway that climbed up to a door that opened on another long set of stairs that immediately descended. Finally, they arrived in a small room formed at the junction of 5 separate passageways. Torches burned in sconces on the walls. Halting, the guard glanced down each passage, his face a mask of confusion. "I swear, by the blood of the Virgin, I have never in my life stood on this spot." Michele asked, "Are we lost?" So that was a reading from The Rising Tide, my novel from Porcupine's Quill. My name is Mark Frutkin, and I'd like to thank the Jewish Public Library of Montreal for sponsoring this presentation. Thank you for listening. Stay well and safe. Good night.